We have a special session today looking at the opportunities for publishing research, especially the challenges that face researchers from the developing world or researchers who are publishing their specialist research output focusing on the developing world. Until recently, most researchers globally in the UK were always having at the back of their mind the question of publish or perish. And so publishing becomes such an integral component. But recently, there was a twist, especially in the UK, with the introduction of the Research Excellence Framework, REF 2014, the previous one, before the recent one, REF 2021, and also thinking about the next one, REF 2028, places great weight on what we publish, where we publish it, and also the impact of it. But the very question of how it's becoming increasingly difficult to break into some good profile journals, good rated journals in economics in general and also in development economics. So we are fortunate today to have Andy introduce discussion about these issues and try to get views from all participants here to address that question of getting published in good journals. It's a question that today, even the most prolific publisher gets a desk rejection or gets some serious challenges. How do we deal with this? And so Andy is a very highly established global name recognition, a scholar, and we should say a good friend, not only of myself, but of SOAS. He's currently Professor of Development Economics at the University of Sussex, and where he has worked since 2006, but also has been affiliated with top universities in the UK and globally. I'm thinking of the University of Nottingham, Oxford University, and others. But one particular element I'd like to emphasize about Andy is his ability to publish work in different areas: international trade, poverty and living standards, labor economics, agriculture and trade. And he has indeed led or co-led a number of research grants on high-profile research in these areas. The other important component is his dedication to the African Economic Research Consortium, ERC, where he's a group chair of Group D on trade. And he has dedicated, of course, his time to Africa and the African economists, and especially as a mentor, mentoring. And he's a very good listener and always very constructive in all views, whether it's private conversation, official conversation, or some of the cut and thrust meetings we have within the RC, and especially with the focus on capacity building among these scholars. So it gives me great pleasure that Andy is able to contribute his time and enlighten us on this question of publishing, share with us his insight, being the editor of the Review of Development Economics, and taking a broad lens to what he has experienced for a long period of time. He's been doing that as editor in this great journal. So, Andy, we are very fortunate to have you here. And so let me welcome you with a hand of applause. so that you can start the sharing your views and insight with us. I'd also like to encourage participants here to also contribute their insights. This is a meeting of people who are active publishers, have published, including those young scholars who begun publishing work in this area for the next 30 to 50 years. So we'd like to look at these issues, the challenges, the opportunities, and also to see whether there is consensus in the way we look at this challenge. So Andy, most welcome.
Thank you very much, Victor. Thank you very much for that kind welcome, and delighted to be able to join you for this seminar. Delighted to be at SOAS, which, as you say, is a place I've had quite a lot of contact with. You and I have lots of contact with each other, of course, through the African Economic Research Consortium and other things, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity. Do we have the slides? Do we have the slides there, or the slides? So thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to be here. It's a real pleasure to present this seminar. Victor and I have known each other for a very long time and interacted a lot, and I've had lots of contact with SOAS in different roles, and from examining PhDs to discussions in relation to REF and all kinds of different connections, and working with people that used to be and still are in SOAS. It's a pleasure to do this. Now, this is your Center for Global Finance. The seminar I'm going to give is not about finance. I was invited to do a presentation to the Center for Global Finance. I thought, what can I present on finance? And then I thought, well, maybe I can present something different, which is a more general issue. But it relates, as Victor said, to the challenge that we all face in terms of publishing our work. And this is something that is difficult for all of us. And however long you've been doing this, it's still really hard. And as Victor says, the very best of people, which I'm not claiming to be, the very best of people get desk rejected frequently and so on. It happens to everybody. It's really tough. There's increasing expectation in publications, promotions depend on it, assessment of university departments in REF and other things depend on it, funding applications depends on it. It's very important. But I want to ask the question from the specific purpose of researchers that are based in poorer countries, in lower and middle income countries, and in the area of development economics, which is the area on which I work. It's likely that researchers in low and middle income countries will face distinct challenges. Now, if we're talking about development economics, researchers in low and middle income countries come from those countries. They know their countries. They should have a lot of advantages from that knowledge of the countries and of the issues and of the problems. But trying to publish is not straightforward. And of course, this is true. It's not a seminar about finance, but the same issues arise in papers about finance. Now, I come at this from two perspectives. One is that I have had a lot of involvement in capacity building, and Victor has referred to my role in ARC, African Economic Research Consortium, where, like him, I'm a group chair, which I've been acting as a resource person for a long time. And this is basically about providing support to young African researchers, most of them in Africa, developing projects, producing good quality research work, which in the end, we hope can also be published. This is important. The second thing I'm bringing for that is that I've been editing this journal, the Review of Development Economics, for now 8 years. And that gives me quite a lot of experience, of course, of dealing with the large number of submissions that we have had and seeing to what extent we, a development journal, a journal focused on the issues relevant to developing countries, how much is it providing opportunities for researchers who are based in those countries? And what I'm going to present here is an analysis of the experience of submissions from researchers who are based in low and middle income countries. Now, not from low and middle income countries, based in low and middle income countries. Because of course, some people from low and middle income countries may have moved to richer countries and may have different opportunities there. I'm interested in the ones that are based in low and middle income countries. And then I'd like to discuss some issues that might influence that. Now, this is completely work in progress. This is completely thinking. I'm going to give you more questions and I'm going to give you answers. I'm very much thinking about these issues myself and continually. So I'll be grateful for feedback. And I don't mind if people want to ask questions as we go along. Let's just relate it a little bit to wider debates. There's, I think, an increasing recognition that publications suffers from a severe lack of diversity. That this lack of diversity is in many dimensions. There are studies of gender diversity and diversity by gender, differentials by gender in publication, differentials by ethnicity, and what I'm going to talk about here, differentials by geography.
Sandy, sorry to interrupt you. We're still looking at slide number 1.
Oh,
I don't know if it's just me or...
I had advanced to slide 4, but could you advance to slide 4 then? I think you may need to control it.
Okay.
So
if
I
you
should
click on the take control button, it should work.
Oh yes, I need to take control. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Now do you have slide 3?
Slide 3, yeah.
2 backgrounds. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Now, this is the one I was meaning to talk about. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for telling me, Adina. So lack of diversity by gender, by ethnicity, by geography. And there are different contributions to this. Nature developed an initiative last year to try to track diversity in research journals with the expectation that, of course, there's not a lot of diversity. In economics, recent articles suggest, and we know this is the case, that there's a high institutional concentration and a lack of geographic diversity among co-editors and editorial boards. Certain institutions are very much disproportionately represented, in particular in the top journals. There's lots of discussion about clubs and networks influencing editors, influencing reviewer decisions, which are meant to be objective, which are meant to be, which are meant to be based on scientific quality, but a lot of discussion and studies rather of club and network behavior. It's a very recent article I saw about co-editors being more likely to publish in their own journals. We should check that out in relation to our own journal, but there's a lot of reasons to suggest that there are questions about publication. Now, I'm only looking at one specific aspect here, which is I'm only looking at development economics, and I'm only looking at researchers based in, I'm looking at researchers based in poorer countries compared to those that are not based in poorer countries. And as I said at the beginning, it's researchers from poorer countries that should have the comparative advantage in development economics. It's their countries these articles are studying. This research is focused on. They should have the knowledge. They should have the knowledge of the context. They should have the knowledge of the issues and so on. But do they get the same opportunities? Now, there are a number of wider initiatives related to what I'm saying here, to the sort of paper that I'm doing here. And this work actually originated from an invitation that I had from the Partnership for Economic Policy, which is a capacity building network based in Canada, but with a worldwide focus, PEP. And they asked me to sort of what conclusions I might be able to draw from my record, or from the journal's record rather, of being able to publish papers of those that are based in poorer countries. The African Economic Research Consortium is very focused on trying to provide research support to those based in African countries. And part of that is to encourage them to publish the work. Yes, they have to produce a paper, they have to produce a final report, but we're also interested in them publishing their work and communicating their work to the world. And there's a whole wider discussion about decolonizing development research, which of course, this is a specific dimension. Now, as I say, it was PEP that initially invited me to do it, but at the same time, they had a number of other initiatives about engagement of researchers based in poorer countries. They had studies by other PEP fellows that looked at authorship published in development journals. This is based on published articles. They looked at patterns of citation, looked at conferences, participation, looked at involvement in policy work, and so on. And generally trying to compare the situation for those based in poorer countries with those based in richer countries. From all of this, they sort of launched a call to action last year, basically suggesting that those from poorer countries face significant disadvantage. And the call to action is to try to address some of those issues. This is a paper, Applied Economics Letters, which we put together in some of that work about underrepresentation of developing country researchers in development research. A bit too much development in that title, but PEP organized a webinar in September addressing the underrepresentation of Southern researchers in development journals. And we had other other journal editors attend. So Chris Barrett, Marcel Pafchamp, and the editors of the Journal of Human Development all participated in this meeting to discuss the sort of issues. And they've had other meetings as well. African Economic Research Consortium is also very committed to try to provide opportunities for its researchers to publish in international journals. This is important for the researchers themselves, because in Africa as well, publications are important in terms of career development. Publications are important in terms of visibility. It's also important for the African Economic Research Consortium itself to show that its work is being published. And its funders like to see that. It's important. Just last week, we managed to produce a special issue, and Victor's heard about this already, a special issue from an AERC project on regional integration. This took quite a long time, but we managed to get this out as a special issue of a journal. And 7 of the 10 articles and 2/3 of the introduction are by African-based researchers. It's not just African-based researchers, but the majority is certainly African-based researchers. And this is a good success, I think, for the authors themselves. Now, I'm going to address these issues in the specific context of the journal that I know and on which I've got information. So I think it's reasonable to expect that researchers from low and middle income countries that have the opportunity to do their PhDs in richer countries will probably have better publication opportunities. They probably have better training. They're probably in a better, more engaged research environment. They have stronger peers and so on. There's a significant advantage often if people are able to study in, say, North America or Europe. The situation is probably more difficult for those who are based in low and middle income countries. Now, of course, if they've had the opportunity to do a PhD in a wealthier country and come back, then they bring that experience back with them. But some may not even have had that opportunity. What I want to do here is look at the fate of papers submitted to the Review of Development Economics since 2015. 2015 is when I and a new team took over of the editing of the journal. And we just want to see what is the record of those that are based in poorer countries compared to those based in richer countries. This is only a very specific aspect of all the big issues I've just talked about, but I think it may offer lessons. A little bit about the journal. So it's an international development economics journal. It was originally set up by Quan Choi in 1997. He edited it for a long time, up to 2014. And then a new team took over in 2015, myself included. And the current editorial team is listed there. Now, the current editorial team, when you look at the institutions, you'll see that the editorial team are exclusively at the moment based in richer countries. We'll come back to that issue later. We're trying to address that issue. We're trying to include people from poorer countries. There are some challenges in doing that. Now, a number of these editors, half of these editors originated from lower middle income countries, but they're now working in higher income countries. This is our current team. It's evolving all the time. We're adding some new people. We're adding, in fact, some people from poorer countries to the list. But that's the current editorial team. We publish 4 issues a year. We publish about 20 to 25 papers in an issue, so 90 to 100 papers in a year. We are absolutely not specific in terms of what we're looking for. We try to cover a wide range of issues in development, theory and applied, macro and micro. We're open to methodological diversity. We're open to a good quality descriptive paper or a review paper. We're not obsessive about causality. Of course, if we can get it, good, but we're not obsessive about it. We publish a series of special symposia. I would say special issues, but it's usually not a full issue. So on particular themes, I'll say something more about that later. We don't at the moment charge a submission fee. The journal used to in the past. We decided not to charge a submission fee. There's pluses and minuses of that, but we don't. We publish in English only. So how well do we do in terms of being open to research conducted by those who are based in poorer countries? Several of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the process of a journal, but let me just describe a little bit what we do. Back in 2015, we got about 400 to 450 submissions. The number of submissions has increased so much since. COVID has led to a big increase in the number of submissions we got. Now, we may be moving out of the COVID time, but we had probably 1,500, nearly 1,500 last year, which is a lot to deal with, And we allocate papers to co-editors. Co-editors do initial review and desk reject a lot of papers because we just cannot review anything like that number of papers. There are not that many reviewers, and plus the quality of a lot of the papers is such that we wouldn't want to send it for review. We try to give people a decision within 3 weeks of submitting the paper. We sometimes reject for reasons of plagiarism as well, which is more common than you think it might be. And now we're probably desk rejecting 3/4 or more of submissions. It wasn't that high in the past, but with the number of submissions, it's increased. If we review a paper, we aim to get 2 reviews. It's not always possible, but we do our best to get 2 reviews for a paper. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but we do our best to get 2 reviews. And the co-editor is the one that makes a decision about the publication. Now, as journal editors, we want to be open to people from all countries. But it's also our responsibility to ensure that our published papers are of a high standard. And that applies wherever the author comes from. We want the work to be of a high standard. So, because we have the submissions online, and so we have data on all the submissions and the fate of the papers since 2015. The data I'm using here, that should say 2022, April 2022 there, that's the period that we're looking at. Now, we know the country of the corresponding author. We know the country from which the paper is submitted. We don't know the country of origin, but we know the country where the people are. And that actually might be more relevant. So if the author is in Sierra Leone, for example, that may be what we want to know, rather than rather than the origin. So we want the researcher who is in Sierra Leone, not the Sierra Leonean studying in Oxford. The information we want is about the country where they are currently based. And I'm not going to present very much data, but I'm just going to give you an idea of what we have, about the submissions that we get, and then about the decisions that we've taken. Now, I'm not here going to talk about the special symposia. That's a different case, and that works in a different way. The ones that we're going to look at are open submissions to the journal that people have made, not in response to a particular call or a particular invitation. Maybe that text is a bit too small, but this is just a list of the countries that submit most papers. In that period, we have more than 4,000 papers. 776 from China. China is our single biggest submitting country, and that has increased over time. In the first years that we did it, we did get papers from China. The number of papers coming from China is increasing over time. That's our, I think, top 21 countries. There's quite a lot of rich countries in that list. Number 2 is US, number 4 is UK, number 5 is Japan, number about 10 or 11 is Germany, and so on. But there's also quite a large number of submissions from middle-income countries there as well, in Asia and in Latin America, Middle East and North Africa. So we have Tunisia, we have Turkey, we have Pakistan, we have Cameroon, we have Nigeria, significant numbers of submissions from these countries as well. There aren't any low-income countries there. The highest low-income country is Ethiopia, which is 24th. We get papers from, over this period, we've had papers from 128 countries. And that's good. We're pleased about that. We're pleased to have that sort of reach of countries. Now, if we group the countries a little bit by the income level of the countries and by the region of the countries, we can see perhaps more useful information than just listing the countries. Going by income group, and this is just the World Bank classification of income, 40% are from high income countries, but 60% therefore are from low and middle income countries. So we're getting quite a lot of submissions from low and middle income countries. Not so many from low income countries. Low income countries are about 9% of the world population. They're about 3% of our submissions. The low and middle income country submissions are more from middle income countries, but of course the populations are substantially larger in middle income countries. We've had papers from 15 of 27 low income countries. So had quite a lot from low-income countries as well. Look at it by region. The biggest is East Asia and Pacific. Now, China is a significant contributor there, but it's far from the only one. Next in the list is Europe and Central Asia, then Sub-Saharan Africa, North America. So we're getting a reasonable number of submissions coming from, say, Sub-Saharan Africa. We're getting countries from quite a lot of regions of the world, not, of course, in proportion to populations, but we are getting quite a lot of submissions from poorer regions of the world as well. And that we're pleased about, and as a development journal, we want to reach out to that. Sorry, gone too. We've made decisions on about 3,300 of these. So decisions about whether to review them or not, and then decisions, if we do review them, about whether to accept them or not. Now, the difference between the 4,100 and the 3,300 are cases in progress, are papers that were not resubmitted, were asked to resubmit and didn't, or papers that were withdrawn, or are special issues. So the decisions information is based on a smaller sample, but it's still a fairly large sample. And if we just look at the fate of just in aggregate, first of all, of those 3,256, 1,175 are reviewed. So almost 2/3 of them are not reviewed. They're desk rejected for one reason or another. I'll say more about desk reject later. Victor talks about, even the best authors get desk rejected. We are doing quite a lot of desk rejecting here as well. The number of papers that journals are receiving these days is huge. There is no way that journals can cope with the number of submissions that they get. But also, the quality of what we're getting is really quite variable. So a lot of these papers are not of good enough quality to be considered by an international development economics journal. Now, of those that we review, we accept less than half, but quite a lot. So over this period, 521 were accepted, 654 were not accepted. So if you get to being reviewed, your chances are significantly higher. There's a good chance of being desk rejected. If we choose to send your paper for review, then you're going to get feedback, and there's a reasonable chance that your paper might end up being published. Now, I think other journals would have a much lower rate than that, but this is where we are at the moment. So 36% of submissions are reviewed, and of those that are reviewed, 44% are accepted. So if you get through the co-editor, if you get across the co-editor's desk, then your chances are not bad. Again, let's look at that by type of country. Now, the first 4 bars there are high-income countries compared to the others, low-income and middle-income countries, and it's much higher chance in. Sorry, this is the likelihood of papers being sent for review. We said that 36% were sent for review. Well, more than 50% that come from high-income countries are sent for review. And less than 30% and almost less than 20% of those from lower middle income countries are sent for review. So there are big differences here between high income countries and the rest. The pattern by world region sort of reflects that. It's North America, Latin America and the Caribbean and Europe and Central Asia, where the likelihood of papers being sent to review are higher. Now, note in that list is Latin America and the Caribbean, which is a predominantly developing region, some high-income countries, but predominantly developing region, but they seem to do quite well in terms of getting papers sent for review. But look at Middle East and North Africa, look at Sub-Saharan Africa, the rates here are much lower. The likelihood of papers submitted by authors in those countries being reviewed is substantially lower, and South Asia as well. So the pattern, I mean, this reflects the sort of pattern by income level that we see that it's wealthier regions as well, where papers are more likely to be. And then we can look at the other thing that I showed you, which is the likelihood that a reviewed paper is accepted. Now, remember, the average likelihood was 44%. It was quite high. Now, compare the first four columns. Compare the high-income countries with the middle-income and low-income countries. Again, it's highest in the high-income countries. But the differences there are less sharp than what we saw in the previous. Sorry. So there we saw quite sharp differences. There the differences are a bit less. Certainly it's higher in high-income countries, but a reasonable number of papers from upper middle-income countries and even low-income countries, a reasonable number of ones that get to the point of being reviewed, have got a reasonable chance of being accepted. And again, the diversity across regions of the world is less than what we saw in the last chart. Again, it's Europe and Central Asia, North America, Latin America, and the Caribbean that come top. South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East and North Africa that are lowest. But the differences here are significantly less. So the barriers that a lot of researchers from poorer countries face seem to be in getting their paper for review in the first place. Now, getting it to review doesn't guarantee it, because still here, the probabilities are lower. Still here, the probabilities are lower. Now, we may not be surprised about this, but I mean, I think it's useful to have these facts and to have information to quantify it. We look at countries where we have most decisions on reviewed papers. So we have decisions on 623 papers from China, for example. 26% of them were reviewed, but of those that were reviewed, 36% were accepted. Now, the rate of review is much higher from authors from the US, the UK, Japan, and Germany, and it's lower for Tunisia, Cameroon, Nigeria, etc. Accepting after review, papers being accepted after review, which is the last column there, is again higher in the richer countries, but the differences between richer and poorer countries at this stage is less. So again, it's getting to review, which seems to be the critical obstacle. Number of reviewed papers which are accepted. This is for the countries with the most reviews. So the highest rates of acceptances are Netherlands, Germany, Australia, US do pretty well. But there's quite a lot of middle-income countries that also do quite well. Brazil, South Africa, Mexico, China, Turkey, Ghana, where the probabilities of acceptance once they're reviewed are still not bad. Now, again, I'm not saying that there's not a difference between richer countries and poorer countries. There is. But some middle-income countries, at least, are doing okay in terms of their likelihood of. It's getting to review in the first place that is the big challenge, I think, for authors from poorer countries. And as co-editors, there's a severe limit there is only a finite number of reviewers, and they're being asked by all journals all the time. There's a finite number of reviewers who are willing and available to review papers. We as co-editors have a responsibility to protect reviewers and to not ask them to review a paper which has got little chance, which we can see at the beginning has got little chance of being published. Anyway, even if you invite people to review these papers, they'll see immediately that this is a weak paper and they won't want to review it. So it's not feasible. This desk rejection stage is very important. It's hard, of course, for people to get desk rejected. Now, as anywhere else, authors in poorer countries face pressures for publication, and it's important for career development everywhere, and it's important for them to see their work published and so on. So they want to submit their papers. But the quality of what's being submitted frequently is not sufficient to make it across the editor's desk. So for what sort of reasons might we desk reject a paper? Now, of course, every case is its own story. But there's some quite common problems which are very frequent reasons for desk rejections. Very frequently, the introduction or the abstract fails to motivate, fails to define a clear research question, fails to tell us why it's interesting, fails to point out its contribution. Now, if an introduction is not doing that, we're not likely to read any further. You know, if we can't see from the introduction what the question is and why it's interesting and what the contribution is, we're not likely to want to review it. Writing the introduction, as we all know, is the hardest part of the paper. It's the most important. We get a lot of papers which are just poorly explained. Now, that's not mostly an issue about being badly written in English. We get that too, but we're not looking for perfect English. We're looking for something that we can understand. A lot of papers are poorly explained. And for that reason, we're unlikely to want to review it. We get a lot of papers which are not a good fit to development economics journal. They're better focused to, they've got a very specific focus that would be better suited to a journal in environment, in finance, in trade or whatever, but there isn't a particular development focus. And sometimes we get papers that are not even about developing countries at all. Sometimes we get papers on the US or richer countries, which of course we're not going to consider. We get a number of papers which are very specific in terms of their focus. That might be a very, very specific topic. It might be a very specific geography, a particular village of a particular country or whatever, without any obvious wider lessons. And we get a lot of papers which are very focused on applying a technique, but actually not thinking about what is the underlying economic question and what can we learn from that. That's a very common issue. We get a lot of papers which are nothing like ready for submission to an international journal. Now, people may not understand what we expect. And I think many authors are not able to differentiate between better and worse journals. And so submit papers wherever they see or wherever they can. But we're getting many papers which are nothing like ready for submission to an international journal. And we cannot accept this. Now, we tried to give people a couple of sentences about why we're rejecting the paper, but there's not time to do more than that. There's not time to do more than that. But so some of the explanations above there may be part of our, explanation to authors. You need to rewrite your paper doing this, this, and this, or you need to rethink your paper or whatever. We get more cases of plagiarism than you might think. Well, those of us that are in teaching may not be surprised about this, but you know, there are quite a lot of cases of detected plagiarism. I say detected plagiarism because, you know, I'm sure the systems are not perfect, and ChatGPT now may be giving us papers and all kinds of clever things. So, you know, this is a challenge that we face. There's other cases that are not plagiarism, but where authors are giving us 50% of text from a previous paper that they published, and it's just not original enough, and we're not going to consider it. I think often authors may not understand what are the international norms in relation to this. So, you know, and we get these issues in relation to students as well from different regions of the world, and you know, teaching, we come across this as well. And there are country patterns to this. Now, so what to make of this? So what to conclude from this? The first thing to say is we are getting a lot of submissions from people in low and middle income countries. And we're very pleased about that. We're very pleased that we're getting a lot of submissions from these countries. Low-income countries are not so well represented. We get lots of submissions from middle-income countries, and that's great. It is true that submissions from high-income countries are much more likely to be reviewed, and if reviewed, are more likely to be accepted. Now, I don't think we should really be surprised about this. The research environment in which people are when they're based in high-income countries is very different to the sort of research environment that we see when we go to poorer countries, where, you know, people may have very heavy teaching loads. They may have little time for research. They may have need to do consultancy to earn income and not have the opportunity to do a lot of research. I don't think the findings are unexpected. I think that's what we would expect. It does reflect our commitment to quality, which we have to be. We have to be accept good quality papers. But is there more that we can do? And the sort of discussions in PEP and all the other discussions that I've talked about are sort of starting to think about some of these issues. One thing we might do is by doing special issues. Now, we've done a lot of special issues. The type is going to be far too small there for you to see it, but we've done a lot of special issues. And we basically got two models of special issues. Some of them come from research projects or conferences. So we've had, for example, a couple of special issues based on projects from UNU Wider. We've had an Asian Development Bank Institute project on aging in Asia. These were research projects. We had papers in an early day from a conference in India and so on. And we've had quite a lot of, we've had papers from an African Economic Research Consortium on fragile countries and so on. And, you know, these have been contributions from research projects. Now, special issues, of course, also get reviewed. And a lot of things that are submitted for a special issue are not accepted. But because there's a sort of pre-screening process here, the probability of being accepted in a special issue is perhaps a little bit higher, because there's a sort of pre-selection process. We've got a second model of special issues, which is to do calls for papers on particular themes. So we've got three special issues there at the bottom, one of which is about money methods and morals, what are development economists up to, which is actually addressing some of these issues. There's one on inequality and there's one on rural development and digital technology, All of these were based on calls for papers. Some of the earlier ones come from projects. But we can design these special issues in a way to potentially have greater participation from people from poorer countries. So if it's an African Economic Research Consortium project, the likelihood is that quite a lot of the authors are indeed from Africa. Many will not be accepted. It's also the case in these special issues. We haven't got enough data really to analyze these in the same way, but people from low and middle income countries still have got less chance of being accepted in these special issues than those from higher income countries. But the differentials are less than what we've seen before. Nearly finished. Just want to think a little bit about other things we might want to consider. And I'm very open to people's suggestions and comments. One thing I think is to try to challenge accepted research norms. We have expectations about what now is good quality research. But a lot of this good quality research, and I'm not only thinking about randomized controlled trials, but that's part of it. This is about things which can be done, and in particular, which can be financed in richer countries. It's very much harder for people in poorer countries to do these things unless they get involved in a project from somebody from a richer country, in which case they probably anyway get involved in a lesser role. We should seek to broaden what is classified as good quality research. And in Review of Development Economics, we very much try to do that. We don't get many papers in this area. Of course, authors in this area want to publish in better places. They're not interested in us. But we want to have a much broader view of what development economics research means and what good development economics research is. And I think that's important for the profession. I think a lot of researchers in poorer countries, and in particular that have a difficult research environment, need guidance on developing research ideas, need guidance in carrying out research effectively, and especially how to write a good paper. Those who already are in good quality institutions, these things are easier. Those who are in an under-resourced university in a poorer country of the world, these things are quite a lot harder. Now, a number of capacity building initiatives try to help with this. The African Economic Research Consortium is one, Partnership for Economic Policy is another, and the Partnership for Economic Policy, for example, has good material for people about how to write papers for publication, and so on. And disseminating this and making this available, I think, is important. And another thing is meaningful but genuine collaborations between researchers in richer countries and researchers in poorer countries, where the poorer countries' researchers are very much playing a key role in the research process, supported by people from richer countries. And there are examples of the earlier work which PEP did, find not that many cases of papers co-authored by authors from richer and poorer countries, but there are some. There's other things. Researchers based in poorer countries may have studied or worked abroad and come back. They're well placed, or they should be well placed, to help local researchers. We, I think, should look at some of the success stories. Some people who have been in poorer countries but have managed to publish well. How have they done that? How have they been able to achieve that? And finally, but very importantly, there's an awful lot of questions for those of us that are editing journals that we really have to face up to. So we need to tell people what we're expecting in terms of paper. We should have co-editors that are based in poorer countries. we're asking for authors from there, we should have co-editors from those countries as well. We will desk reject an awful lot, but we should try to do it at least in some constructive way. Plagiarism is, of course, an ongoing issue. Some journals are allowing for opportunities to publish in languages other than English. We don't, but that might be an opportunity. Though, you know, then there's the question of which languages, and is this just another colonial language and so on, or can we have journals publishing in Mandarin Chinese as well as English? And then whether we want to charge submission fees. Now, submission fees will reduce the number of papers we receive. But submission fees, and the reason we stopped them, the journal having done this before, we felt it was exclusionary. We felt it was a barrier to researchers from poorer countries. But it's a question that we need to think about. We are thinking about these issues. We are thinking about these issues all the time. I'm involved in quite a lot of discussions in these questions. I would really welcome your suggestions and comments. Very grateful to you for listening. Thank you very much, and look forward to any comments or questions.
Thank you so much, Andy. Very profound insight, very clear presentation. I think you've touched on all aspects that are very important to think about, and raised some important questions. I guess that we'll be able to see some suggestions and possible answers. But yes, very fundamental indeed. Thanks, thanks very much. And you've used your insight as editor very, very, very carefully. And for sharing this experience with so much data to back up the ideas and suggestions. Now, let me look through the chart. I think possibly not so many comments in the chat, but we do have some hands up. People, participants that would like, yes, in the order Mona. So we'll go in the same order as Mona, Richard, and then Jonathan, and I also come up with some observations as we go. So Mona first.
Yeah,
Richard,
can you,
go ahead.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question regarding the anonymity of the authors with respect to the core editors as well as the subsequent reviewers. And my second question is, you said at the beginning that you are able to see from which country authors are submitting. So is this clear for the co-editors only, or also for the reviewers? Thank you.
Victor, shall I take a few questions, or?
I think maybe if you want to respond straight away so that we can see whether some people would like to add on that view before we go into the second one. Yeah, so
okay, authors are anonymous to authors are anonymous to reviewers, and reviewers are anonymous to authors. So I mean, of course, when we get a paper reviewed, we always guess who might have reviewed our paper, and sometimes we may be able to do that more accurately than other times. But in principle, reviewers are anonymous. In principle, it's anonymous. The author is anonymous to the reviewer. The reviewer is anonymous to the author. The authors may know which co-editor has dealt with their paper. That's the case. They may know which co-editor is dealing with their paper. Country of submission, is that known to the reviewer? I think probably not. I think the country of submission, no, the country of submission will not be known to the reviewer. The co-editor will, it will be known to the co-editor. It will not be known to the reviewer.
I think this that's just a suggestion from my side. This difference could explain why there is. You said that there is the discrepancy in acceptance by the co-editor is much higher than the discrepancy in acceptance of the reviewer, and probably maybe because the reviewer don't see the country of origin of the author.
No, what I was saying was the likelihood of a paper being sent. What I was comparing there was the likelihood of a paper being sent to review or not. And then I was comparing the decision of the co-editor. So what I was looking at there was the likelihood of a paper being sent to review by whichever co-editor dealt with it. And then the likelihood that a paper was accepted, which is a decision taken by the co-editor. So I don't think that's relevant to what you were suggesting, unless I misunderstood.
Yeah, I thought, Mona, that you are trying. I thought you were going to contest this whole question of blind referring systems, when in some type of journals, sometimes you know who is referring the paper. I thought you are trying. I know that's not what you are doing, but I thought eventually you would want. Do you want to contest it, or is that non-contestable for you?
So I am contesting it. So I'm saying that the co-editor, because he can see the country of origin, then his decision is biased, while the reviewer who can see the country of origin is giving better acceptance rates than the acceptance of the co-editor.
What do you suggest?
I think those situations are not comparable, though. I mean, the papers that are being desk rejected are nothing like the quality of the ones that are being reviewed. So I don't think those situations are. I don't think that those situations are comparable.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think I'll be commenting on this rejection later. But I think in the suggestions, and you are trying to say, try to make this rejection as helpful as possible. I guess you are referring to instances in some journals. Not sure whether this is the case for review of development economics. In some journals, you get a rejection, and myself and two highly distinguished authors, we got a rejection on Saturday, just last week. And we're just comparing the rejection letter on Teams, and noted that there was no comment on the paper at all.
Yeah.
There was no feedback at all on the paper. The rejection letter is standard. It says they are saving you the pain of having to go through the referring system, but no comment on whether the paper methodology was. I suppose that's what you are trying to say on making the rejection helpful.
Yes. Yes. I mean, we tried to take. I mean, we probably take these decisions. We take these decisions in a relatively short time, but in the process of doing that, we'd like to say, these are 2 or 3 key weaknesses that your paper has, and so just to try and give some justification for what we decided.
Okay. Hey, Mona, are you okay with that, or did you want to come back on the points you're raising? Mona, you are muted. Okay, Mona is still muted. Let's go to Jonathan. Sorry, Richard. You are second.
Thanks, Victor. Thanks, Andy. For a very interesting study. In terms of how we define excellent or not, I think that's a very interesting point. Those of us who are also teachers and therefore admissions tutors will know that our esteemed professional colleagues will advise us that an applicant whose first degree is from university in a certain country is likely to be labeled. NARIC advises that a degree from this country is not considered equivalent. when I critique this, a senior professional services colleague threatened me with undermining the academic integrity of SOAS because NARIC is widely accepted in the sector.
Yeah.
And I want to link to that. Obviously, as you say, the reviewers don't know where papers come from and they don't see the names. But once they're published, I wondered specifically from the papers that do make it through from South African authors, I wondered what proportion of those authors have either English or Afrikaans names. And what prompts me is not simply sort of principle, but I find when I try to draw on a wider selection of authors of regions for my own teaching, and I look at who's been writing on South Africa, there are quite a few of them seem to have white-sounding names, seem to have Afrikaans or English names. So I wondered whether you find this in your own journal.
I mean, I would say relative to the share of the population, yes, I think there are definitely more that would have white sounding English-speaking or Afrikaans names. Yes. Is it everyone? No. I mean, we are getting submissions from from African authors, I'm sure. Again, I mean, there's not really enough observations to do a proper analysis of that, but the same sort of process that I'm describing at a global level, I'm sure exists within countries as well, and South Africa being a very stark example. Yes,
because I wondered. Obviously, South Africa, you get established universities with a lot of indigenous African scholars now. But I wondered whether that would be linked to the first point that white scholars are likely to have come through an educational process that defines excellence in a European way.
Yes.
And therefore do better when they seek to publish internationally.
I'm sure that's true, and I'm sure we're publishing more things from UCT and BITS and places like that compared to Stellenbosch and so on, compared to other universities. I'm sure that's the case, and I'm sure similar points exist in other countries as well. Elite institutions, people who are at elite institutions in these countries have got much more chance, I think. I mean, that's of course true within rich countries as well. I mean, the same inequality I'm describing here is also true within the US, within Europe, and so on as well. Yeah, but I'm sure what you're saying is right. I haven't specifically analyzed that question, but yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Victor, you're muted.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Andy. Now let me call upon Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Victor and Andy, for insights into what happens behind the scenes. At least now we know, at least from your transparent discussion. It's very useful for us as researchers, yes. But Andy, I just wanted to learn from you how you'd go about a situation when you've received comments from the reviewer, and in your view as a researcher, you think that the reviewer is exhibiting limited knowledge about the subject somewhat, particularly the methodology, and you would want to rebut, but how best would one then do that to avoid offending, of course, the editor and the reviewer, so that you also improve your chances of publishing in the same journal probably in future or other journals? I say this in the context that there are times when you note that what you're explaining is methodologically correct, but the reviewer is pushing you in a different direction, which obviously is inconsistent with theory. but you want to insist, and you reach a point where you are convinced that you want to withdraw the paper. But then how best would you want to do that so that you still remain friends with the journal? Thank you.
Okay, there's two levels of this, I think. I mean, first of all, not all the reviews we get are good quality reviews. We do get a lot of good quality reviews, but we do get a significant, we do get a number of reviews which are poor quality. Now, it's sort of the responsibility of the co-editor first to make sure that the basis of the arguments made in the reviews is reasonable. Basis for saying no to a paper or asking major revisions or whatever, based on based on what the review has said. So the co-editor does read the reviews, and we don't necessarily blindly follow what the reviewer says. And we have overruled reviewers. We've had sort of reject reviews, and we go against that, and we give a major revisions decision. So that's one level. The second level is, let's say we have rejected the paper, and we have sort of maybe not critically enough read the review. I think it is reasonable for authors to come back, and it sometimes happens. I think it is reasonable for authors to come back and sort of question what the reviewer has said, and whether this is a fair basis for the decision. So I think it is. Now, not all journals, some journals I think might not be willing to engage with this at all. We have had cases where people have come back about reviews, and we've often ended up with a decision where we won't necessarily accept the paper, but if you wrote a new paper like this and did it as a new submission, we might be able to consider it. Now, sometimes we will not agree with the author, and we will say we think the review is right, and the author may disagree, but we think the review is right, and we don't accept what you're saying. But I mean, this is a conversation we are prepared to have. I'm not sure if this is the case for all journal editors, but I'm not sure if this is the case for all journal editors. Is that sufficient answer to what you were asking?
Yeah, very close. And you see, there are instances where you note that the editor or the co-editor is actually siding with the reviewer, even when you know for sure that the reviewer is out of line.
Yeah.
And obviously, no matter how much you explain, you know for sure that you're not winning. So to avoid the rejection, would you then want to withdraw the paper at that point, or you want to wait until it is rejected?
That's a difficult judgment. I mean, if you feel sort of things are stacked against you, then it may be sensible to just withdraw it. But it's probably worth giving it. It's probably worth giving it at least one try and seeing. Yeah, and questioning it, and when people respond to reviewers' comments, they don't have to accept the reviewers' comments. They can challenge the reviewers' comments. Now, there's two situations. One is where your paper is where you get a major revisions decision and you revise your paper. You don't have to do everything the reviewer says. You just need to tell us why you are not doing it and why you disagree. But the more difficult situation is where we've rejected the paper based on the reviewer comments. And then the question is it worth coming back or not? There are other journals that you can go to, so there are other possibilities. But I think if you feel strongly that the reviewer is wrong or misunderstood or hadn't understand what you've done, I still think it's all right to write back and at least ask it to be considered.
Yeah, these are very, very, very interesting discussions.
Thank you.
And I think,
yeah,
so thank you, Jonathan and Andy, for the response. I think we have all gone through this, especially if you get two referees and both actually disagree in the comments, and then so I guess that the editor would then have to make a decision or guidance on how you're going to revise that paper, given that referee 1 is not entirely consistent with the referee 2 in their responses. And sometimes as an author, I end up exploiting the good comments mentioning that actually that's already been observed by referee 1 or referee 2. It may put you, the editor or the co-editor, in a very difficult situation. But I guess among the co-editors, there is likely to be a person working particularly in that area, strong enough for them to be able to distinguish between the right hand and the left hand. Good. So Abi.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Andy?
I can hear you, Abi.
Yes, hello, Abi.
Hello, Andy. Let me try my video. It's not coming on, but anyway. This is a very good presentation and a very challenging one as well, because when we are targeting authors from developing countries, the incentive for researchers based in developing countries is different from the incentive for researchers based in advanced countries. Because if you publish, whether in a very high ranked journal or not, you may not be promoted because the higher education structure in developing countries is completely different. So that is the biggest challenge which we individually cannot tackle. But the issues that you mentioned and the solutions that you suggested, they are very interesting. And I think, in my view, it helped me to think how I can approach capacity building when I work with economists from developing countries. For instance, working in the area of a good seminar on academic honesty to tackle the plagiarism point. Working on good academic writing to avoid desk rejection, and also even helping how they can populate and articulate the different sections of a paper. Very, very good presentations there. One final question, maybe a sort of question I have, is that you said there is a geographical pattern in plagiarism. Can you give us a specific indication? Because that is where we should really target our effort in ensuring academic honesty.
On that, I want to be a little bit cautious. I certainly don't want to name countries. Plagiarism is more common in Middle East and North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. Those are the regions that have the higher rates of plagiarism. But it sometimes even comes from papers submitted from Europe or North America, so they're not necessarily exempt. Or something which is not plagiarism, but it's just sort of reuse of text from other papers. I mean, that's not plagiarism as such, but it's still something we wouldn't consider. That can also happen in richer countries, but it's sort of Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa that probably are the higher rates of plagiarism. On your earlier point about, I think supporting things about honesty, about quality of writing and so on. Quality of writing is so important, and papers being poorly written, such that we're not even quite clear what they're about, is really a big issue. So, the papers that we're desk rejecting, most of them are just not well written, and it just wouldn't be fair to ask somebody to spend the time reviewing it. Should have a complete answer, Abby, to your points.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, the usual guidance in this introduction, where the opening up the paper becomes very, very, very important. I can see in the chat also comments from Refire Maleka. Do you want to ask your question, Refire?
Yes, thank you, sir. The first comment is just relating to how, the results are reflective of the people who attend elitist universities, particularly in South Africa. And that kind of threw me off because those universities are supposedly quite diverse by now, especially with the racial protests that have been going on at Stellenbosch University. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. So I think for me, it's quite important for us to get to the root of the results that we're seeing. When you say that certain papers are just not well written, I mean, yes, Africa's homeland, a lot of people in Africa, their home language is not English, but the same goes for a lot of European countries. So what does not well written actually mean? And I think this is important because Africa, the Middle East, the countries that you mentioned with high rates of plagiarism, for example, need to get to a place where they can develop their own investment and economic theories, which are relevant for the restoration of the least esteemed lives to dignity. So if, like the gentleman who commented earlier, if I am the first generation university graduate, as an example, which I'm not, how do I convince the reviewers or whoever to go down a path which actually deals with this without risking persecution? So effectively, I think I'm touching on two things. Let's get to the root cause. What does not well written mean? What does elitist university have to do with anything? And how do I properly engage with reviewers without necessarily risking me getting kicked out or blacklisted or anything of the sort? Thank you.
Okay, a number of issues there, and let's see if I pick them all up. What does not well written mean? It's not fundamentally an issue about English. It's an issue about the structure of the paper, and it's an issue about what's there. It's an issue about a good introduction, which sort of explains and sells the paper. It's an issue about engaging with literature and using literature to inform the paper. It's sort of justifying the choices and so on. It's things like this, really, that's what, it's not fundamentally the English that matters here. We need to be able to understand it, of course, but we're not looking for perfect English. And most of our authors are second, third, or whatever language English, so we're not looking for perfect English, but we are looking for clarity. But more than that, we're looking for a sort of logical structure of a paper, which, if you don't tell us what your question is and why it's interesting and why it's important, and if you don't justify your approach and explain your approach, well, those are the sort of fundamental things I think about writing which matters. I do think that lack of confidence in English may be a contributory factor leading to people to copy text from other sources. So I do think that is potentially an issue. Again, I mean, we perhaps need to communicate that we're not looking for perfect English here. We're looking for clarity. Now, in terms of elite institutions, I mean, I haven't looked at the data. I haven't looked at the data in this way, and I mean, in lots of countries, I'm not sure I would know how to define an elite institution or a non-elite institution. And elite institutions exist in Europe and North America and so on as well. people at elite
Sorry, I
institutions.
thought you mentioned that in the context of South Africa. Sorry, I was
No,
just pulling from your example in the context of South Africa.
I mean, I was saying, I mean, in South Africa, we probably have more submissions from UCT, WITS and Stellenbosch than from other universities. So in the context of South Africa, yes, we probably do have, but it's not that we don't have, it's not that we don't get submissions from other places, but we probably do get more from those the universities I've just referred to, and do they have a better chance of being accepted? I mean, there's not probably enough observations to do a proper analysis of this, but I suspect in all countries, those who come from, you know, elite institutions have got advantages that you know, people who are not from elite institutions do.
Thank you very much for that.
Not sure if I'm completely answered your questions there.
Yeah, partially. I mean, thank you so much for engaging on this. I do realize that it's a bit of a difficult topic. And I guess just a follow-on question quickly would be whether or not from UCT and Stellenbosch, I myself am a UCT graduate from the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Whether those submissions are from people of color or the Afrikaans and English people. That's a first question. And secondly, I believe that I'm well able to articulate myself. So what is the expectation in terms of us? How do I convince you to invest in theory that will restore dignity to the least esteemed lives? You know, I'm just saying this because South Africa was, as you know, was declared the most unequal country in the world. A couple of years after democracy, right? Yeah. So I'm convinced that it's because we've been adopting investment in economic theories, behavioral economic theories that were never designed for that non-elite 90%. So how do I need to speak to someone of your caliber? How do I go about convincing you without the fear of persecution, without the fear of blacklisting? So those submissions, are they from people like Refilwes, Lebos, Leratos, or is it a Kuabas and a Peter?
So I mean, we won't persecute people, but we may not, of course, accept everybody's paper. We may not review everybody's paper. But write a good enough paper, and we'll look at it. I mean, that's all we can promise, really. Write a good enough and clear enough paper, and all I can say is, well, we'll look at it. We'll consider it. We don't have a particular view in terms of what we're looking for methodologically or whatever. And you know, I tried to suggest that I think we need to have broader views about sort of methodologies which are acceptable and appropriate, and and we're not going to we're not in the habit of blacklisting people. We're not in the habit of blacklisting people, but we are in the habit of, as I said, desk rejecting quite a lot of papers. But I hope no prejudice of any sort underlies that. Those decisions are really based on the quality of what we have in front of us.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate your engagement.
Thank you, referee, and thank you, Andy. A great coverage. Personally, I have picked so many interesting things. I thought I knew everything about publishing, but from the editor, I think from Andy, you were very candid and sincere in terms of really, what goes on in terms of the decision, the engagement between the editorial board and the authors, and also giving us an insight about the journal. You can be sure some of us will be submitting the journal, also maybe taking up request for special issue on some certain interesting themes for the journal. But you covered a lot of important issues, and I agree with you absolutely, especially when you started explaining that researchers in poorer countries have a comparative advantage. They have a knowledge of these economies. Some of them, and for example, Jonathan here was, where you have a researcher, competent researcher, well-published researcher, but who is also involved in policy. So they can pick the issues very quickly, kind of engage with them. But maybe there are some other additional factors that tend to militate against the comparative advantage. Sometimes, especially for some of the research that requires a high degree of disaggregated microdata, especially with farms and households, and where the data is not freely available, it's not costless, it cannot be acquired costlessly. So the high cost of databases now may be an impediment, especially if the researchers are not funded, as most of these researchers are. So they then don't engage with the issues. They know the issues, but they can't illustrate those issues or investigate them, say in terms of empirical work with the very high quality data sets, and also maybe in a working on some of these methodologies at, at the frontiers. That may be an impediment. I know that some of the solutions lie with the some of the work done through the ERC, which provides incentives and also provides funding for acquisition of data. So maybe that's one of the suggestions you give. Adding the suggestions you give, but also there is, I think, in terms of suggestions, I was thinking in terms of where we have all gone through. We have all gone through some helpful mentorship, especially for me. I put great weight, at least in terms of a mentorship through a co-authorship. When I was a very junior researcher, and the research were there, okay, you do the research, you do the economy, you do even the theoretical modeling, you put it, but getting that stage from the initial draft of the paper to getting the acceptance, I really found the gestation period getting closer as soon as I picked the tips from working with very high quality established authors who could even responding to the referees' comments, exhaustively, one by one, bashed one by one. And so the mentorship, in terms of suggestion for the mentorship through co-authorship, I think works. However, I should not forget that I have seen some other established authors who regard mentorship through co-authorship with a different lens. Okay, there are some people who argue, they have different arguments about it, and I don't agree with those arguments myself, because I think that it's the learning curve. You learn very quickly, and going through 3 papers. On the 4th paper, you can knock it out straight into a journal without anybody help. So maybe mentorship through that. But it's also in terms of comparing researchers from poor countries to say some of the rich countries. There is, for example, this opportunity we are having now. We're having workshops. In this workshop, which happens every week, and some people present papers before they send them to journals. And if you can see, for example, welcome to this workshop with a paper in which there is already an editor of an esteemed journal. Others, if you listen carefully to the comments, I think that you could easily go through or circumvent a possible desk rejection, because that discussion we have been about the idea about why is it important? What is the value additionality? Why are you not addressing endogeneity? You know, these are good findings, but you don't take any conclusions out of them, and the kind of thing on the discussion, and then even contesting and say, no, this is possibly not the way I would do it. So I know at SOAS we have a reading group every Wednesday 9 to 10. And all young people come with the papers before they have the confidence to put them to the journal. And we go through them. We convert ourselves into a kind of a review board. So in terms of suggestions, I thought I would put these on the table, and maybe whether you have seen this work, for your suggestion. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Victor. So just in response to some of the points, again, I might not respond to everything. I think the point that researchers based in poorer countries have the advantage of knowledge of the countries and the context, I think is very true, but they often don't feel they can use it in their papers. They often feel, you know, this shouldn't be in a paper or whatever, and it actually should be in a paper, because I think it actually sort of makes the paper more alive and more informative and so on. So I think just having the confidence to get that into the paper, I think is, it depends what the paper's about and so on, but trying to just have the confidence to build on what they know, I think is, you know, I think is something we should encourage. Access to data is a problem, because, you know, some data is expensive to get to, or it's controlled by somebody and is only available for a fee that, you know, people in richer countries may be able to pay, but people in poorer countries may not be able to pay. You know, or the World Bank controls it, or whatever it is. And so I think access to data, I don't think it's as unequal as it used to be, but it's still an issue. And I very strongly believe in the value of co-authorship between more and less experienced authors. It's, you know, of course, it needs to be a constructive partnership and conducted in a supportive way. There are models of co-authorship which are a bit too one-sided, but or a bit too extractive, if you like. But a sort of balanced model of you learn such a lot from that, and you can also learn such a lot by just following through, you know, with a more experienced author. Just the process of submitting to a journal and preparing a paper which is good enough, and how to deal with the referee report and how to respond to it, and all these sort of things. You talked about seminars. I mean, I think what a lot of people don't have in poorer countries is the opportunities to present their work to a seminar. Now, part of what PEP did was it looked at conference participation from researchers from poorer countries, and it was much, much, much harder for researchers from poorer countries to participate in conferences, which were mostly not in their countries. They needed to pay to travel to often Europe or North America, and they often couldn't. And they may not have environments in where they work, where they can present their work. Now, if they're not able to present their works in seminars and conferences and so on, then it's very hard to see how they're going to refine their paper enough and, you know, to produce a paper of quality which can be published. I think reading groups, groups to discuss papers, giving people opportunities to present their work in progress, I think that's tremendously important. I think lots of places people don't have those opportunities.
Oh, thanks so much, Andy. I don't know whether we are running out of time anyway. Time passes very quickly when we're having fun and constructive engagement at the same time. These were brilliant ideas, and thanks very much for sharing this work with us. As you went through the paper, the presentation, I could appreciate that you know, this is has been, you know, you've been working on this for some time. You especially as part of you know, PEP, which is a very highly recognized international capacity building you know, outfit. I'm sure that all participants here will wish to join me to give you a hand of applause. for this great work and for learning from you all this and for sharing the ideas. It's also possible that we should continue to reflect on these ideas as we try to polish our next submission to the journal, including your the very own journal that you edit, a review of development economics. Thank you very much, Andy, and thank you everybody for being able to join this interesting seminar today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Victor. Thank you very much, Athena, for the help in organization. And thank you to everybody for great engagement and comments and so on. We're very much sort of thinking about what to do about this and sort of trying to do things better. For sure, we don't do things perfectly. For sure, there are things we need to do better. All journals, I'm sure this is true. We need to do things better. We need to learn how to do things better. We need to learn how to try to be more inclusive and so on. But these ideas are all very useful and helpful. And I very much appreciate your comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.